Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. Today, plot hooks from the second and third volumes of William Bottrell's Traditions and Hearthside Stories from the West of Cornwall. These will be gathered together with the other Cornish material, which is already being developed on the website, and placed in a gazetteer for Ars Magica 5th edition. Let's dig in. The Fuggo, or possibly Fugo, I don't speak Cornish. If any of you do, tell me if I've mispronounced things. This is a place to delve and perhaps a spirit. Let's quote Bottrell. About a furlong southwest of Trove, on a tenement of Bowley, is the Fuggo. It consists of a cave 6 feet high, 5 feet wide, and nearly 40 long, faced on each side with rough stone, across which stone posts are laid. On its northwest side is a narrow passage that leads into another cave of similar construction and unknown extent, as it has been blocked up by a portion of the roof having fallen in. They say it extends from this entrance at the foot of Bowley Hill to the old mansion of Trove. In proof of this, the old one has often been heard piping under a parlour of the house. It is supposed he meets witches down there, who have entered by the Fuggo to dance to his music. Hares are often seen to enter the Fuggo, which they never come out the same way. They are said to be witches going to meet their master, who provides them with another shape to return in. Old folks of the neighbourhood say there was another Fuggo in Trove Hill, on the opposite side of the glen. There are traditions that almost all these caves were haunted by beings of a fearful nature, whose path it was dangerous to cross. The Fuggo at Bodinar, called the Giant's Holt, was a few years ago much dreaded, and thought to be the abode of ugly Spriggans that kept watch and guard over treasure which still remained buried in its ancient hiding place. There is a somewhat graceful creation of fancy associated with the Vow, or Fuggo, at Pendeen, which is said by some to extend from the mansion to Pendeen Cove, and it branches in other directions which spread away from the principal cavern. At dawn on Christmas Day, the spirit of the Tow has frequently been seen just within the entrance near the cove, in the form of a beautiful lady dressed in white, with a red rose in her mouth. There were persons living a few years since who had seen this fair but not the less fearful vision, for disaster was sure to visit those who had intruded on the spirit's morning airs. And then there's a quote within his quote. One end of it, we know, is within a few yards of the mansion, but no one knows where the other end is found. If there's any truth in the old traditions about the cavern, the audit, Fogu, or whatever it's called, runs for a great distance, some say miles, and some think the eastern end once opened at the cove. Others have it that the old tinners travelled it for 10 times the distance from the house to the cave, and burned more than a pound of candles without finding the end. They always returned frightened, and what they saw to scare them they never got to tell. Perhaps the spirit of the Vow that many have seen at the entrance, in appearance of a tall lady dressed in white with a red rose in her mouth at all seasons of the year, may take a more fearful form in the cavern. Who can tell? And then there's a change of narrator. I believe that many of the fearful stories about the Vow were invented by smugglers. When the fair trade was in its glory, the Vow was a convenient place for storage, and I think the smugglers, who didn't want any faint hearts, with weak heads and long tongues, to come near them, invented many stories to scare such away. One never finds any so fond of prying into other people's business as the foolish ones. Hoopers. Many of the Sawns in the Western Cleaves have similar legends connected with them, only the dwellers in seaside caverns are either of the mermaid race or what we call the Hoopers. The latter are beneficent spirits that warn fishermen, when going to sea, if there is an approaching tempest. The Hoopers shroud themselves in a thick fog which stretches across the coves frequented by them. The powers of a black witch. Her husband always had a favourable wind, so as to make a quicker passage to France and back than anyone else in the fair trade. The fair trade will be mentioned several times, it's smuggling. Besides fish, they said, always came to his hook and net when other fishermen had none. If anyone happened to offend either of the pair, a strange run of bad luck was sure to follow, and nothing proved the compact with old Nick, so much as the rich wrecks which were constantly floating into Pendeen Cove when the pair lived there. Then there's a one-line note that says that the Adder charm, which was mentioned in a previous episode, is powerful to drive away all mischievous sprites. So that's useful to know. Knockers. It was nearly dark when he seed scores of knackers resting on their tools. They were miserable little old withered dried-up creatures. The tallest of them was no more than 3'6", with shanks like drumsticks, and their arms as long or longer than their legs, and they had big ugly heads with grey or red locks, and squinting eyes, and hooked noses, and mouths from ear to ear. The faces of many were very much like the grim visages of old cloman jugs, so Tom said, and more like those of brutes than Christians. One older and uglier than the rest, if that were possible, seemed to take the lead in making wry faces, and all sorts of mocking tricks. When he put his thumb to his nose and squinted at Tom, all those behind him did the same. They all turned their backs, stooped down, lolled out their tongues, and grinned at him from between their spindle shanks. Crumbs for bucker. I often heard when I was a child that there are some lines about leaving the crumbs for bucker, and one would think a tribe of small folks always made their speeches in rhymes. When I was young, it was a custom in the harvest field, at afternoon's refreshment, to pour a few drops of the liquor on the ground for good luck, and to cast a fragment of bread over the right shoulder for the same reason. Fishermen, too, were in the habit of leaving on the sand at night a fish for the bucker, and they were very careful to feed and make much of their cats, to ensure good luck in their fishing. Well-educated locals. In those olden times, in that remote part, there were many who would even now be considered good scholars. The old folks of great-grandfather's days were neither ignorant nor immoral, as it is now fashion to represent them. Books, for their dearness, were comparatively scarce, but the few they had were read over and discussed around the winter's hearth, and the neighbours assembled in a social way not now found in the villages. The story of Troy Town, as some of them called the Iliad, almost everyone knew by heart. Hector was a favourite, that the best horse was named after him, and Penelope had, in most families, a namesake, P, commemorate her constancy. They also had the Seven Wise Masters of Greece, Moore's Almanac, Robinson Crusoe, which everyone knew by heart and believed a true story, 2 or 3 herbals, beside religious books, of which they made little count on the whole. Culpeper was an especial favourite with elderly dames. Stills being common, they experimented with his recipes, and often compounded precious balms that would operate famously as evacuants. Some of these books are after the game period. Devil Money. The boy didn't venture far from his fort for some time after the bull left. At length he crammed down under the shelving side of the rock on all fours, bent forward to see where he put his feet, and when he touched the ground, his hand felt, and he took up what thought, by the feel of it, to be a penny piece or a large button. He ran home, and saw by the light shining in the window that he'd found a penny. When the way was clear, he made a place to hide it, in a hole in the chimney stool. Next night, about the same hour as preceding, he went to the rock, crammed down again, and found 2 penny pieces, which he hoarded in the hole. Night after night, he visited the rock, and found the money doubled from each succeeding night. He picked up silver money in other places, where one would least expect to find it, till his hiding-place was nearly full in a few weeks. How much longer this would have gone on, there's no knowing, but one night his mother came in and found him standing on the chimney-stool, so earnest about something that he didn't see her watching, and he kept handling his money till she said, "Whatever hast thou got there between the stones, that thee art always stealing into the chimney, whenever thou dost think no one is noticing of thee?" "Only buttons and marbles, mother," said he. "I don't believe thee," replied the mother. "Stand away, and I'll see for myself." Saying this, she took up the fire-hook, and pointing it into the hole, she dragged out a lot of money. "Now tell me, or I'll kill thee, you lying thief. Where did you get this money? If thou hast stole it, I'll murder thee, I will." And the boy didn't mind his mother's threats, terrific as they were, for he was used to them. "Oh, good gracious, mercy on us," she cried, after he told her. "Oh, thou wicked boy, thou hast frightened me of my life. Now tell me true. Hast thee used any of the devil's money, put there to entice thee to sell thyself to him, body and soul?" "No, mother, please sure I haven't. I was all saving it to buy a gun." "Well, thank goodness," said the mother, "that I have found thee out in time to prevent thee shooting thyself or someone with the devil's gun. I should never more rejoice if I thought thee hast had a farthing of him. If you know, plague of my heart, that what seemed to be a bull was the old one himself, he placed the money there for thee, and then when the bull seemed to vanish, he changed only into an adder or a toad or something that suited his purpose, and he was watching thee all the time." And she raked all the money out with a fire shovel, and threw it under a brand, around which was good turf fire, and the money melted away, and was gone like hailstones in sunshine. And she carried out all the ashes, and strewed them about the town place, and swept the hearth 9 times before she lit a new fire, and then told the parson. For years after, the boy never ventured to wander by night, and even though he was stout a man as one may see in any market day, the sight of a black bull or anything he took for it would always make him tremble. There are many stories about this class of people having been enticed by the devil's money. but few of them are so fortunate in their ending as this old huntsman's relation. Sorry if my read of that one was strange. The original document is in some sort of attempt at Jacobean with an extra layer of dialect thrown over the top. Moving on. The Cursing Psalm. It is a general belief in the western parts of Cornwall that a greatly injured person, last thing before death, reciting or reading the 109th Psalm, usually called the Cursing Psalm, and applying its connotations to the injurer, ensures that the dying maledictions take effect. Holy rock tables. Within the memory of many persons, there were to be seen in the town places of many western villages an unhewable stone called the Garrick-Zans. This stone was the usual meeting place of the villagers and regarded by them as public property. Old residents of Escles have often told me of the one which stood in their hamlet in the open space where a maypole was also erected. It was described as nearly round, 3 feet high and 9 in diameter, with a level top. A bonfire was made on it and danced around in midsummer. It then talks about the spitting test, which was mentioned in an earlier podcast. But I am retaining this because I thought the Garrick-Zans was a singular object. It appears to be an object that is found in many villages. Then there's a note about how mills were the centre of social life. People would take their wheat to the mill and sift it together and gossip. And a slanderous story in Cornwall is called a mill story because it's where gossip was exchanged. Some millers could play dance tunes, and if they had leisure and were trying to get a company together, they would beat up a crowd. A crowd, in this case, being a sieve, which was used for taking up corn and flour and so on. And they would sing ballads. And then there's a note on Fiddler's Green. Fiddler's Green is a sort of heaven for dead Cornish sailors. It's their version of the Isle of the Blessed. They believe Arthur went there, that orchards are always ripe there. There's music and dancing, all of the things of delight. It's possibly a version of fairyland. Occasionally people refer to it as Avalon or Lioness. There are similar stories in Welsh and Breton folklore.